Thank you, Hannah. I'm so enthralled and excited to see you all here today. Like Hannah said, my name is Julia Alexander. I'm the Curatorial Assistant this year in the Office of Academic Programs here at the Allen. One of the super exciting things about this position for me has been the opportunity to try my hand at curating a small exhibition in the hallway here. These 4 works that comprise the language of the streets. If I can pull them up here, there we go. This show is all about text, how words we notice or don't influence our interaction with a place. The show explores the ephemerality of words, especially in the Walker Evans photograph at the middle right, which describes how Jenny Holzer's inflammatory essay, middle left here, might look if it were taken out of its frame and matting and pasted on a building in New York City, maybe even Cleveland, and exposed to the elements and to the hands and the words of passersby as Holzer had originally intended. So as a musician, I started thinking about the words that we don't necessarily see, but rather hear in any given setting. The Ernest Withers photograph at left led me to consider the emotional impact of protest signage. Then to think about songs as another form of protest language. Today, I'll be discussing protest music, specifically of the civil rights movement, as well as Withers' documentation of protest signage and its effects. It's hard to quantify the power of a song, of something so ephemeral and context-based. But we know that music played a crucial role in many influential protests in United States history. In 1939, Billie Holiday performed Strange Fruit for the first time. It was revolutionary, perhaps the first song to bring a specific political message to the arena of popular entertainment. Here's pop embracing politics. Before this, protest songs were completely separate from pop music, so Win the Strike or Join the Union. This song is timeless because Holiday was an artist, not a campaigner, though it may have ruined the mood at a civil rights march. Around the same time, Woody Guthrie was radicalizing folk music with songs such as This Land Is Your Land, which became a popular protest song, but for common use has been edited down to remove the more pointed verses that talk about private property and class divides. Folk revivalist Pete Seeger worked with Guthrie over the years, most notably as part of the early 1940s musical group, the Almanac Singers. The Almanacs founded the People's Songs Initiative, which published a bulletin to promote and distribute labor songs, thinking that if workers could be taught to sing together, it would promote their fight for better wages and working conditions. They believed this music could be a force to galvanize the working class, but most American workers had little to no interest in folk music. The Almanacs were trying to force feed their music to workers while dressed in what they believed to be appropriate proletarian garb, so overalls and jeans. It never occurred to them that workers only dress that way on the job and expect performers to dress up as they dress up to attend. The Almanac's ties to local issues were more ideological than personal, and the group fizzled out as they learned that the link between folk music and action is perhaps not as direct as they thought. Pete Seeger, though well-intentioned, was often out of touch with the communities he catered to, which was apparent in the ultimate failure of the Almanac Singers. But Seeger's role in the development and dissemination of the unofficial civil rights anthem, We Shall Overcome, was different. Here he functioned more as a vehicle for teaching this and other protest songs to people, familiarizing folks with the tune and encouraging them to think about song as a mode of protest language. This way of sharing music had a greater impact than the Almanacs, who were performing, asserting that they knew best about a movement that was not necessarily their own. Pete Seeger learned We Will Overcome at the Southern Tennessee Highlander Folk School, where he was mentored by Highlander's music director, Zilphia Horton. The school was in operation from 1936 to 1961 as a training center for union organizers and civil rights activists. Horton heard We Will Overcome sung by tobacco workers during a strike in South Carolina in 1946. She was struck by its simplicity and the slow, deliberate manner in which it was sung by a leader of the strike, Lucille Simmons. Simmons changed the earlier lyrics, I will overcome, to We Will Overcome, and sang additional verses such as, We will organize and we will win our rights. Later, Seeger changed the lyric from will to shall, saying that the open ah sound in shall was easier to sing. So we'll take a listen here of Pete Seeger's version.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand.
Much of the contemporary We Shall Overcome is based on two older songs. One is a 1900 hymn called I'll Overcome Someday by Philadelphia Reverend Charles Albert Tinley. The hymn has 6 unique verses and is set to different music, but the last 2 lines of the first verse are nearly identical to the contemporary text. So for those of you who don't read music, I'll give you a little taste here. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. So really no melodic similarities there, but the text is almost exactly the same. Another inspiration is the gospel song, If My Jesus Wills, which was written between 1932 and 1942 by Reverend Mother Louise Shropshire. Not only are the lyrics similar, but the tune is also very close to that of We Shall Overcome. So again, if my Jesus wills, I do believe I'll overcome someday. Seeger admitted later in life that Shropshire should have been given more credit in the development of We Shall Overcome, though she wasn't credited initially. The freedom song No More Auction Block is also a melodic predecessor to We Shall Overcome. No More Auction Block is known to have been sung by soldiers in a Black regiment of the Union Army during the Civil War. Here's the second line. No more auction block for me, many thousand gone. The melody echoes an old Italian hymn tune called O Sanctissima, or the Sicilian Mariner's Hymn. And so this one, again, when I do a little sample here, pay attention to this highlighted part. Come back to that. So, O Sanctissima, O Pissima, Tutti Spiritu Maria. So this bit here that's highlighted, where it really reaches that top note, is super similar to We Shall Overcome. Except We Shall Overcome goes even further in this ascent, moving into a different key that feels very triumphant as it reaches over the top of that initial home key space before coming back down, leading to this very triumphant feeling while singing. The tune of O Sanctissima was first published in 1972 and was included in the repertoire of the 26th North Carolina Regimental Band. We know that Union and Confederate Army bands would play for each other during lulls in fighting, so this is likely how the tune was initially exchanged between these two songs. Today, We Shall Overcome is known internationally as a protest song for various freedom movements. So what makes this song so special? Pete Seeger said, it's the genius of simplicity. Any fool can get complicated. Because of the song's simple structure and repetitive lyrics, new verses can be created on the spot by switching out the words We Shall Overcome for any 5-syllable phrase. A notable verse was We Are Not Afraid. Miles Horton, one of the founders of Highlander, tells the story of an evening in the late 1950s when this verse was born. He says, a group of young people, a youth choir, was at Highlander. They were looking at a movie called The Face of the South. It was dark. Suddenly, raiders came in with flashlights. They must have been vigilantes and some police officers, but they weren't in uniform. They demanded that the lights be turned on, but they couldn't get anybody at Highlander to do it. They were furious, running around with flashlights. In the meantime, the kids started to sing We Shall Overcome. It made them feel good. A young girl named Mary Ethel Dozier, who founded a singing group at the age of 11 to raise money for the civil rights movement, was part of the youth choir at Highlander that night. As the raiders demanded that they quiet down and turn on the lights, Mary shouted, "We are not afraid," and the group began to sing it together. The bravado shaken out of folks through song leads to a deeper sense of courage and empowerment. When sung during marches and demonstrations, songs like "We Shall Overcome" raise the spirits of those who are marching and also help bring in people who may be watching from the sidelines. Pete Seeger performed his rendition of "We Shall Overcome" at the Highlander Folk School's 25th anniversary gathering, which was attended by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, among others. Seeger plucked out the tune on his banjo and invited the crowd to sing along. "There's something about that tune that haunts you," Dr. King said, after he couldn't stop humming the tune in his car. Seeger also published this version in his magazine, People Songs, with the marking "slowly and freely" in an attempt to replicate Lucille Simmons' performance of the hymn. The song did not catch on at the time, though. Two other folk revivalists, Guy Carawan and Frank Hamilton, helped develop the song rhythmically with Seeger and Horton. Lucille Simmons had sung it in long meter or freely with no strict rhythmic constraints. The development from Seeger's initial plodding 4/4 arrangement to the new version in 12/8 time gave the song a driving triplet pulse. It should be noted that co-arranger Frank Hamilton had been attending Black church services to learn the musical styles. He also worked with the classically trained singer turned folk revivalist Odetta earlier in her career as she was beginning to figure out her iconic rhythmic guitar style, sometimes called the Odetta strum. A young Bob Dylan, after hearing Odetta for the first time, traded in his electric guitar for a flat top acoustic like the one she played so powerfully. Martin Luther King referred to Odetta as the queen of American folk music. She was born in Birmingham, Alabama, but moved to California with her family as a child. In San Francisco, she became involved in the folk music scene. She said, "It straightened my back and kinked my hair." Odetta's afro was one of the first seen in popular culture. She was unapologetic and political in everything she did, her vibrato-filled operatic voice bellowing forth. Before Seeger, before Dylan, she was turning prison songs into struggle songs, playing in coffee houses and small clubs, and inciting collective action. Because she didn't care for cohesion or the commodification of her music, she has been mostly forgotten in comparison to other popular singers of her time. Guy Carawan took over as the director of music at the Highlander School in 1959 following Horton's death. At the school, he accompanied singers on guitar, giving them the courage to begin to sing and share their song. Carawan's goal was to record and archive the evolution of the civil rights movement through song as he traveled around the South, hosting workshops, teaching freedom songs. In 1960, he invited 70 young people to Highlander for a weekend workshop called Singing in the Movement. Carawan taught them all sorts of songs, but the hit of the weekend was "We Shall Overcome." 5 weeks later, in Raleigh, North Carolina, Carawan attended the founding convention of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Someone in the crowd called out to him requesting that he teach "We Shall Overcome." Carawan recounted this performance saying, "At a certain point, those young singers who knew a lot of a cappella styles, they said, 'Lay that guitar down, boy, we can do the song better.' And they put that sort of triplet to it and sang it a cappella with all those harmonies. It had a way of rendering it in a style that some very powerful young singers got behind and spread." In 1962, a group of 4 SNCC field secretaries came together to form a group called the Freedom Singers. Rutha Mae Harris, Bernice Johnson Reagan, Cordell Reagan, and Charles Neblett. They toured the country raising money for SNCC and teaching freedom songs to young people, helping organize them to involve themselves in the movement. Bernice referred to the group as the singing newspaper. So let's take a listen to their rendition of "We Shall Overcome."
We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I will be.
much as I want to hear it again, we're going to move on. So Julius Lester was a folk singer and a SNCC field secretary who co-authored a guide to the 12-string guitar with the aforementioned Pete Seeger. Lester brought his guitar to Mississippi during the 1964 Freedom Summer. He said, "My job was to get people to start singing and to create that sense of community through people joined together in song." Lester would play his guitar and lead Black church congregations in singing freedom songs such as "We Shall Overcome" for 30 minutes or an hour until people were really present, at which point the organizers would start speaking to the congregation. But the music produced the energy, Lester said. The music created community, and the music fought the fear. One of the reasons I believe We Shall Overcome has such tenacious historical significance is because songs related to Black liberation are seen as timeless and applicable to the struggle of anyone in need of relief. This is the primary reason why this song has been co-opted by other social movements, including the anti-war movement, the women's liberation movement, and the disability rights movement. In 1977, taking inspiration from the nonviolent sit-ins of the civil rights movement, a group of over 100 disability rights demonstrators took over the San Francisco office of the Department of Health, Education, and Wellness, or HEW, for 26 days. 2 weeks into the occupation, a smaller group of protesters traveled to Washington, D.C. to seek national attention. Because it was so difficult to find accessible transportation, protesters that used wheelchairs had to ride in the back of a U-Haul with a cargo lift. In DC, they met with congressional representatives and held candlelit vigils outside of HEW Secretary Califano's home, singing Sign 504 to the tune of We Shall Overcome. And on April 28th, Califano did sign the regulations. The success of 504 opened the door to a new era of accessibility that eventually led to the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. The lyrical versatility and melodic simplicity of this song have distinguished it as a force of resistance when sung collectively. Martin Luther King once said, "Revolution, though born of despair, cannot long be sustained by despair." Singing together can be a way of creating a space for hope. It's a way of being in a community and moving toward a collective purpose. However, one thing We Shall Overcome does not do is tell folks when the overcoming is going to happen. Someday is no longer a timeline that is satisfying for those who are continuously harmed by a system that is built upon oppression. By the 1960s, people were exhausted, and to ask them to dream of a someday that might be better quickly became an uninspiring, if not angering, sentiment. Less than 1 month after Martin Luther King's 1963 March on Washington, 4 children were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. The bombing was the latest tragedy in a violent year, just months after NAACP Mississippi Field Secretary Medgar Evers was murdered as he arrived at his home, getting out of his car holding a stack of Jim Crow Must Go t-shirts. At the funeral of 3 of the murdered girls, 8,000 people sang We Shall Overcome, but the song already had 1 foot in the past. Legendary singer-songwriter Nina Simone wrote her first political song that year. According to her autobiography, when she heard of the bombing, she felt she had to do something and set about fashioning a makeshift pistol out of scrap metal she found in her garage. As the story goes, Simone's husband walked into the room and said to her, "Nina, you don't know anything about killing. The only thing you've got is music." She abandoned the gun and moved to her piano, and an hour later, her first protest song had been written, entitled Mississippi Goddamn. This frantic and powerful song demands to be heard. "I think every day is going to be my last," Simone says. "I've even stopped believing in prayer." As Simone sings of segregation and picket lines and centuries of tragedy, her band members act as the voice of the establishment, singing over and over in the background, "Do it slow." But she's run out of patience. "This whole country is full of lies," she says. "You're all going to die and die like flies." We'll take a listen.
I don't trust nobody anymore. They keep on saying go slow. That's just the trouble. Desegregation, mass participation.
After years of keeping the faith in the face of fire hoses and tear gas, We Shall Overcome began to sound like a song for suckers. Of the 1963 March on Washington, Malcolm X said, "The white man tricked you, had you marching back and forth between the feet of a dead man named Lincoln and another dead man named George Washington, singing, 'We shall overcome.' He made a chump out of you. He made a fool out of you. He made you think you were going somewhere, and you end up going nowhere but between Lincoln and Washington." Julius Lester, the folk singer whom I mentioned a few minutes ago, was also a prolific writer and proponent of the Black Power movement. In 1968, he said of the nonviolent civil rights movement, "Now it is over. The days of singing freedom songs and the days of combating bullets and billy clubs with love. We shall overcome sounds old and outdated. Those northern protest rallies where freedom songs were sung and speeches speeched and applause applauded, and afterwards telegrams and letters sent to President and Congress, they began to look more and more like moral exercises. See, my hands are clean. I do not condone such a foul deed," they said, going back to their magazines and newspapers, feeling purged because they had made their moral witness. Recalling his experience of driving at night during the Freedom Summer in Mississippi, Lester described the fear when he would see a pair of headlights behind his vehicle. Then, as that car pulled up beside him, not knowing whether he was going to look over and be staring into the barrel of a shotgun. He said, "There wasn't a song in the world that can make a difference in that moment." Now, up to this point, I've been talking about the music of the movement. This goes hand in hand with the signage and other visual elements used to spread the message during marches. The best resource we have for learning about the signage used in protest is the photographs that folks like Ernest Withers captured. Many visual documentarians of the civil rights movement did not consider themselves to be simply photographers, but activists and organizers with cameras. Withers, however, tried to be as uninvolved as possible in order to limit his knowledge and emotionality. An incredibly prolific photographer, he sold many images to the FBI, who used them to identify and keep tabs on organizers. And he sold others to newspapers across the country that were covering the movement. Withers was a devoted father of 8 children, and he was determined to put them all through college. Withers' work with the FBI cannot minimize the role he played in the civil rights movement and getting it on its feet. His involvement with the movement began in 1955 with his coverage of the Emmett Till trial. Not only did he capture iconic photos that galvanized people into action all across the country, he also worked behind the scenes to bring witnesses to testify in court and then help them safely relocate and start new lives after the trial. The support Withers garnered for the movement through his relentless documentation was integral to its early success. Withers took this photo in 1961 at one of the first civil rights marches in Memphis, Tennessee. Pictured is protester William Edwin Jones and his daughter, who at the time was just 8 months old. Dr. Renee Andronetta Jones Jeffrey is now a pediatrician in Memphis. The photograph was taken by Ernest Withers at a father-daughter march. It was hoped that the presence of young girls would decrease the chance of violence against protesters. Renee's mother and nearly 2-year-old brother stayed home, along with women and sons from the rest of the family, so that in the event that things did get violent, whole families would not be lost. In this photo, Jones holds a sign above the stroller that takes on Renee's voice. It reads, "Daddy, I want to be free too." The emotional plea of this protest sign interrupts the cold language of the advertising signage in the background of the photo and helps us to better understand the visual exchange between Jones and the police officers lurking in the squad car. Withers also took a series of photographs of the 1968 sanitation workers' strike in Memphis. The strike began on February 11 after 2 garbage collectors were crushed to death inside their garbage truck. The strikers demanded recognition of their union, safer working conditions, and decent wages. 1,300 workers walked out. Early on in the strike, a few hundred people marched quietly down Main Street each day. They often held uniform signs, drawing attention to the city's and the country's neglect of its Black citizens and employees. The signs used strong, plain language, bold uppercase text against a white background, the goal of which was visibility and undeniability. After a sit-in conducted by the sanitation workers and other supporters of the strike, Memphis City Council voted to recognize their union and raise their pay. The strike could have ended then and there, but Mayor Loeb rejected the city council vote, asserting that he was the only one who could make that decision. At the next day's march, police used mace on nonviolent protesters. A group of demonstrators had rushed to help a woman who got her foot caught under a patrol car, and the police attacked. Withers' wife, Dorothy, recalls him returning home quietly later that day with a bloodied head, an occurrence that was not uncommon for Withers, who often placed himself in the middle of the action in order to truthfully document the events of the movement. That day's violence galvanized the movement. On March 18th, Martin Luther King visited Memphis to address the sanitation workers. A crowd of around 25,000 people gathered to listen, the largest indoor gathering of the civil rights movement up to that point. King promised to return to march with them in a few days, and on March 28th, he arrived to find a massive crowd awaiting him. The Community on the Move for Equality, which was a group of local ministers, handed out signs that read, "I am a man." Ernest Withers and a few friends had purchased 2x2 pine planks, sawed them, and attached them to the signs for greater visibility at the march. Withers was likely interested in the sign extenders as a photographic prop. He snapped the photo to the right before the march. In it, a group of demonstrators raised the placards above their head, creating a sea of uniform signs. Because of Withers' relentless photographic coverage of the strike, we know that throughout the 6 earlier weeks of the marches, protesters had held signs in their hands or wore them suspended on string around their shoulders, as shown in the photo at left. March 28th was the first day they had carried them attached to wood sticks. Over the past few weeks, the sanitation workers' strike had gained thousands of marchers, among them many high school and college students, nearly a quarter of them white. On March 28th, as King led the march down Beale Street, chaos took over. Ripping the signs off the sticks provided an instrument to smash windows, and the police swarmed to stop looting, and they injured over 100 people and fatally shot a 16-year-old boy. Withers would later admit that he felt he might be responsible for the riot because he helped gather and saw the wood for the signposts. A few days later, on April 3rd, King returned to Memphis to deliver his famous mountaintop speech the night before he was assassinated. Mentioning the events of March 28th, he said, "You know what happened the other day, and the press dealt only with the window breaking. I read the articles. They very seldom got around to mentioning the fact that 1,300 sanitation workers were on strike, and that Memphis is not being fair to them, and that Mayor Loeb is in dire need of a doctor. They didn't get around to that." It took nearly 2 more weeks before the city of Memphis recognized the workers' union and agreed to raise their pay. In 1988, visual artist Glenn Ligon painted this recreation of the sanitation workers' signs with the same slogan, shifting the line breaks slightly. He used a combination of fine art oil paint and sign painter's enamel. As it turns out, these two paints have different drying times, which resulted in a rough surface that cracks as it ages. Although this was an accidental effect, it gives us the opportunity to think about this work as an object, aging like history. Reflecting on the work, Ligon says, "History is not static. The painting is not static." The painting represents these simple mass-printed protest signs as art objects, more significantly, as visual signifiers of the movement as a time to be remembered. In the same way that the surface of the painting has changed and shifted over time, the meaning and weight of protest songs and signs have changed, demonstrating the ephemerality of the words that surround us. Thank you.